I was 26 that year, living alone in a small rented apartment in Columbus, Georgia. I'd always liked being outdoors. Growing up, my dad used to take me hunting and camping. When I got older, I didn't have many people left to go with. I guess life kind of separated everyone. So I started doing solo trips. Quiet ones, just me and my backpack and a map. That weekend in early November, I picked a strange place to camp. I'd heard about Graveyard Ridge through an old hiking forum post, the kind people stop updating after a few years. It wasn't a marked trail, not really even a destination. Just a high ridge out near the Pine Mountain Range where someone had dumped a bunch of broken headstones decades ago. Some said it used to be part of an old family cemetery, long since forgotten. The stones were cracked and half buried, and nobody knew why they were all up there, scattered on the ridge. I don't know what made me want to camp there, maybe just the name. Graveyard Ridge. Something about it sounded peaceful in a strange way. I packed light but prepared. 2 days worth of water, my tent, a sleeping bag, knife, flashlight, backup batteries, a cheap old GPS tracker, and my .38 revolver. I never go anywhere that remote without it, especially when I'm alone. I told my coworker, Carl, that I'd be off-grid for 2 nights. I didn't give him details because I didn't want to hear it if he thought it was weird. But I made sure he knew when I was supposed to check back in. It was a Friday when I left. Cool air, bright sun. I parked my truck at an old trailhead off a dirt road west of Hamilton, locked everything up, and started hiking by noon. I followed a narrow trail for a while, overgrown and barely visible, then used a printed map with some rough GPS waypoints to guide me uphill toward the ridge. It wasn't easy. The terrain was rough and barely traveled. Most of the woods were thick pine and oak. I had to bushwhack my way in places. By late afternoon, I found the spot. I wouldn't have known it was Graveyard Ridge if it weren't for the stones. They were scattered all over a flat clearing on top of the hill. Maybe 30 or 40 pieces of headstone, all broken. Some had names, most didn't. Dates were faded or chipped off. One had a lamb carved into it. Another just said infant son with no other markings. They weren't in any neat order, just dumped there like trash. It didn't feel spooky. Not at first. Just quiet. Lonely. But it also felt untouched, like no one had been there in years. I liked that. I picked a flat spot near a patch of moss and set up my tent. I boiled water on my little stove, ate some freeze-dried beef stew, and watched the sun go down through the trees. The view was good, open sky, stars already popping out one by one. It was dead silent by 9 p.m. Not even wind, just cold air and the occasional sound of pine needles falling. I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep easier than I thought I would. The first night was uneventful. I woke up around 6:30 the next morning, made some instant coffee, and walked the ridge. I checked out the stones again in the daylight. Still strange. Some looked newer than others, but even the new ones were covered in moss and weather damage. I counted 39 pieces total, though it was hard to say how many belonged together. Some looked like they were part of the same grave but had been broken in half. It made me think someone had moved them here, but why would they, and when? By mid-morning, I hiked downhill a little to explore the area. I didn't go far, maybe half a mile out in each direction. It was just thick woods in every direction. Quiet, still. I didn't see any animals, no deer, no birds. That was odd. Even in November, you usually hear something. A squirrel, a crow. But there was nothing. Back at camp, I ate lunch and rested. I read from a paperback I brought and tried to enjoy the stillness, but something started bothering me. I don't know what triggered it exactly. Maybe it was how quiet it was, or how the wind never picked up even once, or how the air just felt wrong. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was alone, camping near what might have been a grave site. Maybe my brain was feeding into it. Still, I stayed. But that night, something changed. I turned in around 9 again, zipped up tight in my bag with my flashlight and revolver within reach. The tent was warm enough, and I drifted off fast. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. I just opened my eyes in the dark, fully alert. I listened. There was nothing at first, just silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady ones. Crunching leaves. Maybe 20 or 30 feet from my tent. They didn't sound like deer. Not even close. These were heavy. 2 feet. Walking. Then they stopped. I sat up slowly and grabbed the revolver. I didn't turn on the flashlight yet. I just listened. The footsteps started again. Closer. A few steps. Then stopped. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure it would give me away. I waited. Maybe a full minute. Then crunch. Crunch. Closer. Who the hell would be out here in the middle of the night? No lights. No sound. Just walking around? I finally turned on my flashlight and clicked off the safety on my gun. I unzipped the tent fast and jumped out, sweeping the beam of light in a wide arc. Nothing, just trees, rocks, and darkness. I stood there for a long time, turning in a slow circle with the light. No movement, no sound. I walked out about 10 feet from the tent in every direction. Still nothing. I even checked the tree line, crouching low and scanning for any kind of movement. But it was empty. I told myself it might have been an animal. A bear, maybe, though they don't walk like that. Still, I couldn't explain it. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, the tension in my chest still hadn't gone away. I felt watched. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the trees had eyes. I packed up early. I planned to stay 2 nights, but I didn't care anymore. I was done. I started down the ridge, retracing my steps with the GPS and map. But 20 minutes in, I stopped. There were boot prints. Not mine. They were deep, fresh, and led up the same trail I was heading down. They weren't there yesterday when I hiked in. I would have seen them. The tread was different from my own boots. These had a sharper heel and narrower toe. They came up from below, then stopped maybe 50 feet from my old campsite. Then they vanished. Just stopped like whoever it was turned around and walked back the same way. I checked all around. Nothing led away from them, just stopped cold. It made my stomach twist. I kept moving faster now, but the feeling stayed. That weight in the air, that sense of being watched. I didn't even stop to rest. I just pushed through brush, followed the GPS route back toward the truck. But when I got back to the old trailhead, I found something that made my blood go cold. My truck had been moved. Not far, maybe just 20 feet from where I parked it. It was angled differently, like someone had tried to drive it and then changed their mind. I know I didn't park it that way. I remember exactly how I left it. Facing downhill, tight against a cedar tree. Now it was slightly uphill. Tires shifted in the pine needles. There were scuff marks in the dirt near the driver's side door. And my back window was smeared with something. Grease, maybe. I don't know. The doors were still locked. My keys still worked. Nothing looked stolen. But someone had been there. I got in and drove off fast, checking my mirror every few seconds like some idiot out of a horror movie. I didn't feel safe until I hit the highway. And even then, the feeling didn't go away. Back in town, I washed the truck and checked for damage. Nothing. No scratches, no dents. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I barely slept that night. I didn't go to work Monday. I called in sick and spent the whole day online trying to find more about Graveyard Ridge. But the weird part is, I couldn't find anything. The old forum where I'd first read about it was gone. Dead link. The posts I remembered? Erased. The user profile that posted the original directions? Deleted. It was like the place didn't exist anymore. I even went to the library and asked around in the local history section. Nothing in any old maps or records. No mention of a family cemetery on that ridge. No missing gravestones reported. Nothing. I tried to let it go. Weeks passed, then months. I never went back there. Then one day, around May the next year, I came home from work and found a small package on my doorstep. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single item, a cracked, moss-covered piece of granite, a headstone fragment. On it, barely visible, were the words, "Infant son," same as the one I'd seen up there. There was no note. I reported it to the police. They didn't find fingerprints. They said it was probably a prank, that maybe someone from the hiking forum played a joke. But I knew that wasn't it. I moved a few months later, out of Columbus, took a new job up in Kentucky. Haven't camped alone since. Haven't even unpacked my gear. But I still think about it, especially late at night when I hear footsteps outside, even if it's just the wind. My name's Kyle Bennett. I'm 43 now, but this happened when I was 36, back in the fall of 2018. I had taken a long weekend to head out on a solo hunting trip in the northern part of Idaho, near the Canadian border. The woods out there are deep, quiet, and far enough from the beaten path that you don't run into other people if you don't want to. That's exactly why I picked it. I'd had a rough couple of months at work, and my wife and I were having trouble getting along. I needed a break from everything. No phones, no noise. Just me, my rifle, and the forest. I packed everything into the truck: gear, food, tent, water, first aid, satellite GPS unit, everything. I had hunted this area before, though it had been a few years. There was a pull-off from a fire access road that led to a small clearing where I could set up my base camp. From there, a narrow game trail branched into the woods where I'd tracked elk years before. I planned to stay 3 nights, maybe 4 if the weather held up. I reached the site around 3 p.m. the first day, a Thursday. The drive had taken most of the morning, and the last hour was slow going along washed-out dirt roads. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp air, no wind, blue skies. I pitched my tent in the clearing, set up my small cook station, stashed food in a bear bag, and double-checked everything. I even placed my spare boots and socks under a tarp in case rain rolled in. After getting camp in order, I took a short hike to get a feel for the area again. The trail was still there, although overgrown in some spots. There were signs of deer and maybe elk, tracks, droppings, some rubbed bark. I didn't go too far since daylight was already starting to fade. I wanted to be back before dark to cook and settle in. Everything felt peaceful. No sounds but birds and the occasional rustling leaves. That night, I ate beans and rice from my little propane stove and drank a couple of beers I'd packed in a cooler. I was tired from the drive and hike, so I crawled into my sleeping bag around 9 p.m. The woods were silent. No crickets, no wind. It was the kind of silence that presses on your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. Still, I wasn't bothered. I camped alone plenty of times. The next morning, I got up before sunrise, boiled some coffee, and packed light for a day of hunting. I took my rifle, binoculars, compass, GPS, and a day pack with snacks and water. I followed the game trail deeper into the woods for miles. I stopped to glass over a ridge a few times, but didn't see anything worth taking a shot at. I was more focused on just being out there anyway. The trees were tall and dense, the forest floor soft and damp from old rain. Pine needles muffled every step. Around mid-afternoon, maybe 2:30 or so, I came across a weird clearing that I didn't remember from past trips. It was about 30 yards wide, surrounded by tightly packed pine trees. In the center was a decaying wooden platform, maybe once a small cabin or lookout deck. It had collapsed into itself long ago. Grass and brush were growing through the broken boards. There were rusty nails sticking up and bits of weathered tarp half buried under the debris. A few old, busted-up plastic chairs sat near it. One half melted like it had been near a fire. The clearing had an eerie, out-of-place feel. Not quite wrong, just strange. It was the only sign of any man-made structure I'd seen out there. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably someone's old hunting platform or a failed camping spot from years ago. I moved on, following the trail past the clearing. I hunted until dusk and headed back toward camp. The whole time walking back, I felt like something was different. The woods didn't feel the same as they did that morning. They felt heavier somehow, like the quiet had deepened. There were fewer bird calls, no movement in the trees. I kept checking over my shoulder like I expected to see someone behind me, even though I hadn't seen a soul all day. When I got back to camp, everything looked untouched. Tent still zipped, cooler where I left it, my food bag still tied up high. I tried to shake off the feeling, made some dinner, and turned in early again. That night was colder, and I had trouble falling asleep. I kept hearing faint sounds, twigs snapping, a low rustle in the brush, maybe 50 yards out. I told myself it was deer or raccoons. I didn't light a fire that night. I didn't want to draw attention. I lay awake most of the night, my rifle within arm's reach. The next morning, Saturday, I decided to head back toward the clearing and explore it more. Curiosity had got the better of me, and I wanted to poke around in daylight. I left earlier this time, carrying my full gear load and a bit more food in case I didn't make it back until evening. I found the clearing again after about 2 hours of walking. The air around it felt colder than the rest of the woods. I stepped into the clearing, carefully scanning the ground. It was still dead quiet. No animals. No birds. I walked to the collapsed platform and crouched down to look closer. There was a faded piece of canvas nailed to a board with something written on it in Sharpie, but the ink had bled out from rain and time. I could make out only a few words: stay away, hunted, and maybe not safe. I wasn't sure what it meant. Could have been a joke. Could have been a warning. Maybe someone had a bad experience here years ago. Behind the platform, I noticed something odd. Fresh boot prints in the mud. Not mine. Someone else had walked there recently. The tread pattern didn't match my boots. They were deeper, heavier, maybe from someone carrying a lot of weight. There were 2 sets, one slightly smaller. I followed them for a bit until they veered off into the brush, heading in a different direction from where I'd come from. I stood there for a while, feeling exposed, listening. Nothing, just that same quiet that had settled over the woods the day before. I made a slow loop through the area, scanning every direction. After 20 minutes, I decided to head back. I didn't like the idea of someone else being out there without knowing it. On the way back, I kept checking over my shoulder. A few times I thought I saw movement between the trees, but when I stopped, there was nothing, just the same thick forest. I reached my camp late that afternoon and immediately noticed something wrong. My tent flap was unzipped. I knew I'd closed it. My cooler was still there, but the latch was undone. Inside, one of the beers was missing. That set off alarm bells. I opened the tent and checked inside. My sleeping bag had been moved, my extra pair of boots were missing, and my flashlight was gone. Someone had definitely been in my camp. I looked around for tracks but didn't see any clear ones. The ground was covered in needles and soft dirt that didn't hold a clean print. I stood there trying to think. Should I pack up and leave? Should I stay one more night and hike out in the morning? I didn't want to walk those roads in the dark. I still had my rifle and my GPS. I decided to stay but keep my boots on and sleep light. I moved everything valuable inside the tent and set up a tripwire of fishing line with a bell on it, something I always brought along just in case. That night was the longest of my life. Around midnight, the bell jingled. Just once. Not loud, not frantic. Just a soft tap. I grabbed my rifle, clicked off the safety, and lay there, listening. No other sounds. No footsteps. I waited, breath shallow. After maybe 20 minutes, I crawled out of the tent and scanned the clearing with my flashlight. Nothing. The trees stood motionless like always. The bell had been nudged only slightly, but there was no animal in sight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat against a tree with the rifle across my lap until dawn. As soon as it was light, I packed everything as fast as I could.
No breakfast. No coffee.
I just wanted to leave. I stuffed my gear into the truck and peeled out of the clearing, bouncing hard over rocks and roots, trying to get back to the main road. About 5 miles down the dirt road, I spotted something in my rearview mirror that made my stomach twist. 2 figures, far back at the edge of the road, standing just off the tree line. Watching. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving until I hit pavement and didn't let up until I was well out of the forest. I got home late that evening and told my wife everything, down to the bell, the footprints, the missing boots. She didn't say much, but she could tell something had shaken me. I filed a report with the Forest Service, gave them the GPS coordinates of the clearing and told them what I'd seen. They said they'd look into it. A week later, they called me back. A ranger told me they went out to the site and didn't find any sign of people, just the old platform and some trash. No fresh tracks.
No gear.
Nothing. I've never been back. I still hunt, but not alone, and not anywhere near Idaho. I don't know who those people were or what they wanted. Maybe squatters, maybe something worse. All I know is I was lucky I left when I did. Something about that place was wrong. Not in a ghost story way, just wrong, like the woods themselves were holding a secret and I got too close to it. And I don't ever want to get that close again. I was 28 when I decided to take a short camping trip alone in the Lake District. It was late October 2021. I'd been working from home for almost a year and a half due to COVID. The isolation and monotony of staring at my laptop all day, every day, was starting to get to me. I needed a break from everything: screens, people, traffic, even noise. I craved that sort of deep quiet that you can only really find in the countryside. I'd camped before, but only with friends. This was going to be the first time I'd gone out by myself. I had a decent tent, a down sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, a portable stove, dried food, and a good water filter. I wasn't roughing it too hard, but it was going to be more than a simple glamping weekend. I planned to stay 2 nights up on a quiet hill not too far from a small lake called Bowscale Tarn. I picked that spot because it was off the beaten path, but not dangerously remote. There was a village, Maplestead, about a 90-minute walk from there if I needed anything. I arrived on a Thursday morning. The sky was gray, thick with low clouds that pressed against the hills, but there wasn't any rain. The air smelled like wet leaves and mud. I parked my car in a levee off the narrow road outside Maplestead, hoisted my rucksack, and started walking up the path toward the hills. There weren't any other cars there, which gave me a strange mix of comfort and unease. It was what I wanted: quiet, but also a reminder that I'd be properly alone. The walk was steady but not too hard. I reached the area around Bowscale Tarn by early afternoon. The place was exactly what I'd hoped for: silent, with nothing but the sound of the wind brushing through the dry bracken and the distant call of sheep somewhere lower down the slope. The lake itself was small, still, and dark. I picked a spot a little higher up the hill, near a rocky outcrop that gave me some shelter from the wind. I pitched my tent, unrolled my sleeping mat and bag, and set up the small camping stove. I boiled some water, made tea, and just sat there, staring at the water below, thinking about absolutely nothing. That first night passed uneventfully. It got cold, colder than I expected, and I had to sleep with all my layers on, but I managed to stay warm enough. The sky cleared up around midnight, and when I stepped outside to relieve myself, I looked up and saw a spray of stars I hadn't seen since I was a kid. It was the kind of view you forget exists when you live in a city. The next day, I woke up around 7. I made porridge with powdered milk, had some tea, and went for a long walk along the ridgeline. I didn't see a single person all morning, not even a hiker in the distance. I wandered without any direction, just following the hill curves and watching the light shift over the grass. Around 2 in the afternoon, I returned to my tent to make lunch. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were footprints, boot prints, coming down the slope toward my tent. They were fresh. The soil was damp and soft, and the edges of the prints were sharp. I knelt down and looked closer. The pattern didn't match my own boots. Whoever it was had walked down from higher up the hill, paused near my tent, and then turned back the way they came. I followed the prints with my eyes. They disappeared into the heather up the hill. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to make of it. It wasn't illegal for someone else to be there, obviously. It was public land. But it was strange that someone would hike down near a solitary tent, stand around, and leave without making themselves known. Most hikers at least give a wave. I hadn't heard a thing. I tried to shrug it off. Told myself it was probably just another walker. Maybe someone who thought about saying hello but changed their mind. But I couldn't stop glancing up the hill every few minutes. That uneasy feeling stayed with me all afternoon. That night, the wind picked up hard. It rattled the tent and made the outer rainfly flap like a sail. I barely slept. Around 3:30 a.m., I finally started to drift off. That's when I heard it, something moving outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the grass. But then there was a distinct crunch. Footsteps. I held my breath. They were slow, heavy steps, not an animal. I lay frozen, listening. Whoever it was stopped right outside my tent. I heard them shift, maybe leaning closer. I didn't breathe, didn't move. My heart pounded against my ribs so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Then, slowly, the steps moved away. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Still nothing. I unzipped the inner flap just a little and looked out through the mesh. There was no one there. In the morning, when the sun was up, I stepped outside. The grass was bent in a line, fresh prints in the soft soil again. Same pattern as before. They led down toward the tarn, then disappeared over a ridge. I made breakfast with shaking hands, packed up my stove, and sat with my back against the rock ledge for a long time. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pack everything and head straight back to the car. But the rational part of my mind kept telling me it was nothing, just someone passing by. Still, something about it felt wrong. That person, whoever they were, had come to my tent in the middle of the night and stood there just outside, watching, listening. That wasn't normal. I didn't hike anywhere that day. I stayed close to the tent and kept a small knife clipped to my belt. I didn't need it, I hoped, but it made me feel a bit more in control. Around mid-afternoon, I saw someone. He was standing up on the ridge behind my camp, maybe 200 feet away, just barely visible through the bracken and the pale autumn light. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark green coat and heavy-looking boots. He didn't move. He was just standing there, watching. From that distance, I couldn't make out his face. I stared at him for a long time. He never moved. After maybe a full minute, I blinked, looked away for half a second, and when I looked back, he was gone. I packed up everything as fast as I could. I didn't even bother folding the tent properly. I just shoved it into my rucksack. I headed down the hill in a straight line, ignoring the footpaths, crashing through the heather and wet grass until I hit the gravel track that led back toward Mungersdale.
Ivalkiet fast.
My boots slipped on the wet stones, but I didn't care. Every 10 steps, I looked back up the hill. At one point, I thought I saw someone, on the edge of the path behind me. But when I stopped to stare, there was nothing, just trees and shifting shadows. I made it back to my car in about 90 minutes. My legs were aching, and I was soaked with sweat, but I didn't stop. I threw my pack into the back seat, got in, locked the doors, and sat there with my hands gripping the wheel until my breathing slowed down. I didn't see anyone in the mirror. No one came down the road, but that feeling, that pressure of being watched, stayed with me the entire drive home. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing the sound of footsteps in the grass outside my window, even though I knew it was in my head. I kept thinking about how quiet he had been, how long he might have been standing there. A few days later, I went online and started reading about other hikers' experiences in that area. I found a few forum posts from years ago, people talking about a man in a green coat who would show up around that part of the fells. One person said they saw him crouched behind a rock, watching their campsite at dusk. Another said they saw someone matching the same description walking barefoot through a bog near Skiddaw, but when they called out to him, he turned and sprinted into the woods. No one had any answers. Some joked it was a forest ranger. Others said it was just a local messing with tourists. But the details always matched. Tall, thin, green coat, never speaking, always watching. I haven't been camping alone since. I still go hiking, still love being outdoors. But I don't sleep out there on my own anymore. There's something about that silence at night that doesn't feel peaceful to me anymore. It feels hollow, like something is hiding in it, waiting. I don't know what that man wanted. Maybe he was just some loner living off-grid, curious about me. Maybe he was dangerous. I'll never know. But I think about him every time I zip up a tent, every time I turn off a torch and lay down in the dark. And I still wonder if he was out there before I even noticed him. If he was already watching me from the moment I stepped onto that hill. It was October of 2016 when I decided to spend a weekend alone camping in the woods of northern Arkansas. I was 31 back then, single and between jobs. I had just quit a sales position that I'd been stuck in for 6 years, and I hadn't lined up anything new yet. I needed a break from everything. I thought a solo camping trip would clear my head and give me some space to figure things out. I liked being outdoors, but I wasn't what you'd call an experienced camper. I had basic gear and some general knowledge, but I'd never gone out completely alone for more than one night. The area I picked was part of the Ozark National Forest. Not a particularly remote section, but still far enough off the main roads that I figured I'd get some peace. I planned to hike in about 3 or 4 miles and pitch a small tent near a stream I'd marked on the map. It was midweek, a Thursday, so I figured I'd have the area mostly to myself. The forecast called for light rain later that night, but I wasn't too worried. I had a decent tent, and I thought a little rain would just make things more relaxing. I got to the trailhead around noon. My pack wasn't heavy, just the essentials. Tent, sleeping bag, some food, water, small stove, extra clothes, and a first aid kit. I'd left my car in the gravel lot just off the main highway, locked everything up, made sure I had phone service, I did, and started walking. The first couple of miles went by quick. The trail was narrow but clearly marked, winding through hills and patches of thick trees that were just starting to turn color. It was quiet in that particular way the forest gets in early fall, where everything's still but not quite dead yet. The air smelled earthy and wet, and every so often, I'd spot a squirrel or hear something crunch in the leaves off the trail. By the time I got to the stream, the sky was already dulling into gray, even though it was only around 3 in the afternoon. I found a decent spot a little uphill from the water, flat enough to pitch the tent, but high enough to stay dry if it rained hard. There were signs someone else had camped there before. A blackened ring of rocks where a fire pit used to be, and a few broken sticks scattered around. But it didn't look recent. I set up the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and then went to gather some more firewood just in case the rain held off. By 5, it was already getting darker than it should have been. The clouds had rolled in thick, and the wind started coming through the trees with that slow, whistling push that makes the branches sway a little too much. I made a small fire just before the first drops started coming down. I sat under a poncho draped over a branch and boiled some water for instant noodles. It wasn't fancy, but out there it tasted fine. I ate slowly and listened to the forest as it adjusted to the rain. The patter of raindrops started light but steady. They tapped against the leaves and pine needles like fingers drumming on a table. That soft rhythm eventually turned into a full-on shower by the time I packed up my food and climbed into the tent. The rain picked up, and the fire hissed itself out by the time I zipped the door shut. I laid back and listened. The rain hit the nylon in waves, drumming harder when the wind gusted through, then quieting down again. It was calming at first, peaceful even. I laid there on my back, my hands behind my head, thinking about nothing in particular, just watching the fabric of the tent ripple slightly each time the breeze pushed in. I must have dozed off at some point. When I woke up, it was full dark, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I checked my watch, it was just past 10. The rain was still coming down steady, and the wind had picked up. The sides of the tent puffed in and out with every gust. It was colder than it had been earlier, and my sleeping bag had gathered a little moisture from the air. It was around then that I first heard it, a noise that didn't quite belong. At first I thought it was just the wind again, branches creaking or something falling, but it was different, duller, more rhythmic, like footsteps, but not steady or rushed, just slow. A single step every few seconds, crushing wet leaves or twigs underfoot. I froze and held my breath. The sound stopped. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then it started again. Closer. I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was buried deep in my pack, and I didn't want to make a sound rustling around to find it. I just laid there, dead still, straining my ears. Whatever it was, it stopped again, maybe 15, 20 feet from my tent. No other noises.
No breathing.
Just the sound of the rain. I told myself it was probably a deer, maybe even a raccoon, something moving through, disturbed by the weather. But my gut didn't believe it. I've heard animals in the woods before. They move fast. They shuffle and scurry. This didn't sound like that. It sounded like something walking upright, not running, just slowly approaching, then stopping. After a few minutes of silence, I reached slowly over to my pack and found the flashlight. I clicked it on inside the tent, just enough to light up my hand. The walls glowed softly from the inside. I didn't hear anything outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still out there, standing just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I laid there, holding the flashlight in one hand and my small pocket knife in the other. The rain kept falling, and every little crack or creak outside made my heart thump harder. Every now and then, I thought I heard something brush lightly against the side of the tent, but that could have been wind or a branch. When dawn finally came, it was a relief to unzip the tent and see light again, even if it was gray and misty. Everything was soaked. My boots, the pack, the outside of the tent, all of it slick with rainwater. I stepped out into the wet grass and took a slow look around. I didn't see anything strange at first, just the forest, damp and quiet again. Then I walked a little downhill closer to the stream. That's when I saw them. Footprints, not shoe prints, bare feet. Human. They weren't big, maybe the size of a small adult's, but they were unmistakable. The rain had softened the edges, but I could still make out the shape of toes and heels in the mud. They came from the trees behind my tent and stopped just 20 feet from where I'd been sleeping. Then they turned and went back the way they came. I followed them for about 30 feet before the trail disappeared in the wet leaves and brush. I didn't keep going. I didn't want to. Something about them chilled me in a way I still can't explain. They weren't hurried. They didn't run. Whoever made them just walked up to my camp, stood there for a while, then turned and left. I packed up everything as quickly as I could. I didn't even stop to eat, just rolled the wet tent, stuffed it into the pack, and got moving. Every noise behind me made me twist around. A couple of times I swore I saw something shift between the trees, but when I stopped to look, nothing was there. By the time I got back to the trailhead, my clothes were soaked through, and my hands were shaking. I threw my gear into the back of the car, peeled off my wet jacket, and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. I didn't tell anyone about it when I got home. What was I supposed to say? That someone walked barefoot through the woods to stare at me while I slept, then disappeared? I never went back to that area. I never even looked at the map again. I threw it away with the muddy gear I couldn't clean. I still go hiking sometimes, but never alone. Never far off marked trails. And if the forecast even hints at rain, I stay home. It's been years, and I still think about those footprints. Not because of what they were, but because of what didn't happen. Whoever it was didn't try to get inside my tent. Didn't leave a mark. Didn't make a sound. They just came to watch. And that's what gets me most. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo camping trip out in the woods behind Stony Gap, Virginia. I'd been working 12-hour shifts for months straight at a welding yard down near Suffolk, and it was all starting to wear thin. My back hurt, I barely slept, and the air in the shop felt like breathing ash. I needed quiet. I needed air that didn't taste like metal. I needed to get away from people, even the ones I liked. I had grown up with camping. My dad took me out every fall, back before all the land around us got chopped up for logging roads and gas lines. I hadn't done a proper trip in years, but I figured it would all come back. I chose an area I hadn't been to before, somewhere real out of the way. Deep in the Blue Ridge region, near an abandoned sawmill where the road thins to gravel and loses its stripes. I'd seen it on a map once. No traios, no maintained sites. Just the kind of overgrown area most people overlook. My coworker had told me about it in passing once. Said it used to be popular for hunting back in the 80s before the state closed off access to the old mill road and let the land reclaim it. Sounded perfect. I packed up on a Wednesday in mid-October, brought a small one-person tent, a thick sleeping bag, a hand-cranked flashlight, 2 knives, 1 fixed blade, 1 folding, a loaded .22 revolver I kept mostly for snakes or varmints, and a week's worth of dry food and water. I kept everything simple. I'd stay for 3 nights max, hike out, camp 1 or 2 ridges up from the mill ruins, and spend some time clearing my head. The drive out was slow. The road turned to gravel just like I'd been told, and then even the gravel started to thin out, giving way to packed dirt, leaf litter, and ruts so deep I had to pull over and walk the last stretch. I parked my truck behind a thicket of wild blackberry brambles off the edge of the road, well out of sight. I slung my pack over my shoulder, locked the truck, and took off walking. It was already early afternoon, and with the daylight shrinking by the week, I didn't want to waste time. I followed the old logging road until it vanished beneath roots and vines, then bushwhacked my way up a slope toward a small flat clearing I'd seen on a topographical map. That was going to be my base camp. The air out there was different. It had that dry, sharp bite that only shows up in October. The trees were mostly oaks and hickories, all in the middle of shedding. Leaves crunched under every step. Somewhere out in the distance, I could hear squirrels rustling branches and the occasional blue jay calling sharp and loud. I felt good. The farther I got from the road, the less tight my chest felt. By the time I reached the clearing, the sun had already dropped low behind the ridge. I cleared the brush, set up my tent, and dug a fire ring with a flat rock for cooking. I stacked up firewood in a loose pyramid and sat there a while as the woods went quiet for the evening. That's something I'd always forgotten about camping. The stillness that shows up around dusk. It was almost complete silence, save for the crackle of the fire and the occasional wind in the treetops. Not a single voice, no car horns, no phone buzzing. It felt like stepping back into an earlier part of my life. That first night passed quietly. I woke up once to pee and noticed the woods were dead quiet. Not strange quiet, just calm. I fell back asleep almost immediately. The next morning, I decided to hike down toward the sawmill ruins. I figured they were maybe a mile and a half downhill, nestled in the hollow where a narrow stream ran through. I left my pack at camp and brought only my knife and a canteen. The woods got denser the farther I went. Thorns tugged at my pants and I kept having to duck under fallen branches. But I eventually spotted what was left of the sawmill. It was mostly collapsed. A big moss-covered rectangle with half a roof. Warped wood beams caved inward like ribs poking through an open chest. The weird part was that it didn't look completely abandoned. There were fresh boot prints in the dirt, and I saw a plastic water bottle half buried in the weeds nearby. The label was faded, but not bleached like you'd expect. I figured maybe a hunter had come through recently or someone was squatting there. Still, it felt off. There were drag marks too. Something had been pulled along the ground not long before I arrived, like a sled or maybe a deer carcass. The marks were wide and ran into the woods at a sharp angle. I followed them for a few yards before I decided it wasn't worth poking around someone else's business. It wasn't my land after all. I headed back to camp and spent the rest of the day gathering wood and boiling water. That night was different, though. Couldn't sleep. I kept hearing something move in the woods past my fire ring. It wasn't the normal rustling of raccoons or possums. This was heavier, more deliberate, like someone taking slow steps over dead leaves and pausing in between. I sat up inside my tent for an hour with my knife laid across my lap, trying to control my breathing. Every few minutes, I'd hear it again, 2 or 3 steps, then nothing, then a twig snapping, then more silence. Eventually, I forced myself to crawl out and stoke the fire higher, just to give the impression that I was awake and alert. I never saw anything, but I felt watched the whole night. Something was out there. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I found fresh tracks near my fire ring, boot prints again. Not mine. I hadn't been walking around during the night. These ones came in from the east side of camp, stopped just 10 feet from the tent, then turned around and went back the same way. I stood over them for a long time trying to understand why someone would do that. No signs of tools, no trash, no other markings. Just one set of prints in, one set of prints out. I should have packed up then. I know that now, but at the time, I told myself it was probably a hunter passing through, someone curious. Maybe they saw my fire and wanted to make sure I wasn't hurt. I convinced myself of that, even though everything in me said it was wrong. I stayed that night too. Didn't light a fire. Just sat in the dark with the revolver resting on my leg, ears straining at every sound. The woods didn't feel calming anymore. They felt narrow, like the trees were closing in on me. The silence wasn't peaceful. Felt heavy, like a lid on a box. Around midnight, I heard something again. Footsteps, closer this time. Slower. I swear I could hear breathing too. Real, steady breathing. I stayed frozen in my tent, gun pointed at the door flap. Then I saw the shadow. Just a vague shape passing by the side of the tent, close enough to block the moonlight for a few seconds. I didn't move, didn't even blink. Kept going, slow as hell, and then the woods went quiet again. I sat like that until morning. At first light, I packed everything in under 15 minutes. I didn't even eat, just shoved everything in my bag and started back down the hill toward the truck. The whole time I felt like I was being followed. I kept turning around, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything. Still, I started moving faster. When I reached the road, I noticed something that chilled me to my bones. My truck had been messed with. The passenger door was cracked open, and the glove box had been rifled through. The seat was pushed all the way back like someone taller than me had sat there. And my spare key, the one I always hid under the rear bumper magnet case, it was gone. I ended up using the actual key from my pocket, but my hands were shaking. I drove out of there as fast as I could without wrecking my axle. Didn't stop until I hit the main highway and got cell service. Even then, I didn't call anyone. I just drove home. That was 8 months ago. I haven't been camping since. I check the locks on my doors twice every night now. I installed motion lights around my yard. A few times since then, I've thought I saw a figure standing across the street near the tree line, just out of the light. I can't prove it and nothing ever happens, but I know what I saw. I keep the .22 loaded on my nightstand now. I don't go out to the woods anymore. Whatever I walked into out there, it wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a creature. It was a person, a real person who came into my camp at night and watched me sleep. Someone who followed my trail back to my truck, got inside, and found my spare key. And they know who I am now. That's why I'll never go back. It was early October of 2018, just after the leaves had started to really change. I had a week off from work and decided to get out of town and spend some time alone in the woods. I was living in Knoxville, Tennessee at the time, working in HVAC repair. It had been a long, hot summer, and the idea of cold nights and a campfire sounded like exactly what I needed. I picked a remote area in the Cherokee National Forest, near the North Carolina border, about 2 hours away from home. I packed everything I needed: my old canvas tent, a thick sleeping bag, my cooler with some dry ice to keep things cold, a propane stove, 2 knives, a small hatchet, a first aid kit, a GPS, a physical map, and my phone, even though I figured I wouldn't have service out there. I also had a .38 revolver my dad left me when he passed away. I'd never needed it, but I always brought it when I camped alone. I didn't tell many people where I was going. Just my older brother, who didn't ask questions. That's how we are. We check in when it's over. I got to the trailhead around 10:30 in the morning. There was only one other truck in the lot, a beat-up old Silverado with a broken tail light. It didn't bother me. I figured they were probably a hunter or another solo camper. I parked and started the hike in. The trail I chose wasn't marked on the newer maps, just a faint logging path from the 80s. I'd found it on a message board where other backpackers shared hidden spots. They said it led to a ridge with a clearing that overlooked a creek valley. No one camped there unless they really knew the area. The hike in was rough, about 4.5 miles. The trail was overgrown in parts, and the air smelled like damp leaves and old bark. There were no voices, no cars, nothing but the scrape of my boots on the dirt and the occasional crack of a squirrel or bird in the underbrush. I reached the clearing just before 2. It was everything I wanted: quiet, high up, shaded by tall oak and hickory trees. The view of the valley below was wide and empty. I didn't see any smoke or signs of other camps, just endless forest. I set up my tent near the tree line for cover and got a small fire going with some dry kindling I brought. I made coffee in my battered old percolator and ate a can of beans straight from the fire. I stayed close to camp that night. The stars came out and the air turned cold fast, probably down to the 40s. I could hear an owl calling far off and some smaller things moving in the brush, probably raccoons or possums. I slept light, like I always do in the woods. The second day, I hiked down to the creek I'd seen from the ridge. It was steep and took most of the morning. I filled my bottles, ate jerky by the water, and followed the stream a ways just to see what was out there. I found an old beaver dam and a patch of mushrooms, mostly inedible ones. I didn't see a single person, not even tracks. I liked that. When I got back up to camp, it was getting late, and I started prepping for the night. That's when I noticed something odd. A branch had been laid across my fire ring. Just a thin stick, maybe the size of my wrist, laid diagonally across the rocks like someone had meant to make a sign. I didn't remember putting it there. It wasn't there when I left. It was too clean, like it hadn't been stepped on or burned. I stared at it for a long minute. Could have been wind, maybe, or maybe it fell from a tree just right. I told myself that. Still, I scanned the area, looking for footprints or broken twigs, but didn't find any. Nothing was missing from camp. Nothing had been touched, at least not in a way I could prove. That night, I kept the fire going a little longer than usual. I didn't like how quiet the woods were. The wind had picked up and leaves kept scratching against my tent like fingers. I barely slept. Every sound felt louder. Once, I thought I heard a footstep outside, but when I looked out with my flashlight, there was nothing but trees and fog. I chalked it up to nerves. On the third day, I stayed close to camp. I didn't want to wander off and leave it unattended again. I gathered more firewood, sharpened my hatchet on a flat stone, and cleaned out the fire ring. I tried to relax, but something was off. I had the feeling you get when someone's watching you, that itchy, hot feeling on the back of your neck. I kept turning around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one, just the same trees, same silence. In the afternoon, I walked a slow circle about 100 yards out from camp to scout. That's when I found the tree. It was an old oak, maybe 40 feet tall, not far from a game trail. On the side of it, about shoulder height, was a fresh cut in the bark. A big X carved deep with something sharp. It was clean, no moss, no weathering, no insects. It had been done recently. I didn't make it, and it wasn't natural. My gut twisted. I turned in a slow circle, trying to see if anyone was nearby. I didn't hear anything, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone else was out here, and they knew where I was. I walked back to camp fast. I packed up some things, loaded my pistol, and kept it on my hip the rest of the evening. I didn't plan to shoot anyone, but I wanted it close. I had the fire going bright that night. Too bright. I think I was hoping it would make whoever it was stay away. I didn't go to sleep until after 2. Even then, I only dozed. Every rustle outside made my hand twitch toward the gun. I didn't hear anything solid, no footsteps, no breaking branches, but it felt like something was out there, just past the light. I woke up to the sound of something metallic. It was early morning, still dark, maybe 5. My eyes opened fast. I knew the sound. It was the latch on my cooler. I had a padlock on it, but it wasn't heavy duty. I listened, heart pounding. Then I heard it again, a soft click, and then what sounded like the lid being lifted and shut. I sat up slow, grabbed the pistol and my flashlight, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fire was out. The woods were black. I waited, breath held. Nothing moved. I pushed out slowly and scanned with the light. The cooler was closed. I stepped toward it, my feet silent on the leaves. It looked untouched. I opened it. Everything was still there, but the lock was gone. Just gone. It wasn't on the ground. It hadn't fallen off. It had been removed. On purpose. That was enough for me. I packed everything I could carry and stuffed the rest into a trash bag, which I hid under a pile of rocks near a dead stump. I left a note on the tent that said I'd be back for the rest. I didn't want to haul it all in one trip. I needed to get out. I marked the trail with bits of orange tape on my way back, in case I needed to come back quick. The hike back felt longer. I was jumpy. Every sound made me stop and scan. I kept the gun out the whole way, hidden in my coat sleeve. When I got to the parking area, the Silverado was still there. Same broken tail light. I looked inside as I passed. Nothing inside but some empty food wrappers and a pair of old boots. I didn't stick around. I drove straight back to Knoxville, barely stopping for gas. I told myself maybe it was nothing, maybe just a coincidence, but I couldn't shake it. Who carves a fresh X near someone's camp and removes a lock in the middle of the night? It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there. Someone who wanted me to know. A week later, I went back to get the rest of my gear. I brought my brother with me. He's ex-military, doesn't scare easy. We hiked in early, talking loud, making our presence known. When we got to the clearing, the tent was still there, but it had been slashed open with a knife. 2 big cuts across the side. My tarp was gone. The rocks covering my trash bag had been moved. The bag was still there, but it had been opened. Everything inside had been taken out and laid in a neat row. My cook pot, extra socks, a can of soup, even my toothbrush. Like someone had inspected each item. We didn't say much. We packed up in silence and got out fast. I haven't camped alone since then. I was 34 that summer. I'd spent most of my adult life working long hours in a warehouse outside of Tulsa, loading trucks and stacking pallets. After my divorce in 2022, I stopped doing much of anything outside of work. I'd go home, eat, drink a few beers, and go to sleep. I didn't see people much. Didn't want to. That year, though, something shifted in me. I started watching those YouTube videos where guys go hiking in the middle of nowhere, cooking over campfires and sleeping in hammocks. That sense of peace stuck with me. I needed that. I needed to get away from the lights, the traffic, the people. So in late June 2023, I requested a week off work and packed up my truck. I had an old Ford F-150, beat to hell and loud as a freight train, but it still ran. I loaded up a secondhand tent, a used sleeping bag I got from a pawn shop, a small cooler, and enough food and water for 5 days. I had my old .22 rifle in the back too, mostly for comfort more than anything. I didn't plan on hunting. I just liked knowing it was there. I drove out to the western end of the Oklahoma Panhandle, way out past Boise City. The area I picked was remote. Just empty land, red dirt, sagebrush, and a few old cattle trails. I'd found it on a random blog written by a guy who cataloged forgotten public land. It wasn't a park, and it wasn't private. Just wilderness. If anything happened, there wouldn't be anyone nearby to help. That was part of the draw for me. Took me a little over 7 hours to get out there.
No towns.
Just occasional farms and long stretches of nothing. By the time I reached the turnoff, a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the prairie, it was nearly 5 p.m. I followed the road slowly, dodging deep ruts and dry washouts until I reached a low basin between 2 hills. That's where I parked. The grass was knee-high in some spots, dry and yellow. The wind blew constantly, never hard, just steady. I set up camp near a cluster of juniper trees on the north side of the basin, maybe half a mile from a dried-up creek bed. The air was still and hot, but it felt good to be out there. No cell signal, no people, just wind, grass, and sky. The first night passed quietly. I made a small fire, ate a can of chili, and drank a bottle of water while the sun set. When it got dark, it got dark. No light pollution, just stars. I heard a few coyotes yipping in the distance, maybe 2 miles off. I wasn't worried. I zipped up in my tent and fell asleep with no issues. The second day I spent hiking around. There was a dry arroyo to the west, full of white sand and scattered bones. Probably cow bones. I found a collapsed wooden structure, maybe a feed shed or an old bunkhouse.
No roof.
Just the frame half sunk into the earth. A little eerie, but nothing unusual. I saw some mule deer tracks and what looked like mountain lion scat. I made mental notes and took some photos. When I got back to my camp in the late afternoon, something felt off. Nothing was missing. My gear was where I left it. The tent was fine, but the fire pit looked different. The ring of stones I made had been pushed inward a bit, like someone or something had stepped on it. Maybe a deer had wandered through. That's what I told myself. I rebuilt it and let it go. That night, I had a harder time falling asleep. I kept hearing things outside the tent. Not just animals, but movement, soft crunching in the grass. Once, I thought I heard something sniffing the outside wall of my tent. Long, slow breaths. I held my breath, listening. I didn't move. After maybe a minute, it stopped. I stayed still for another 10, then quietly reached for the rifle beside my sleeping bag. I didn't unzip the tent. I just lay there holding it until I fell asleep around 3 a.m. On day 3, I seriously thought about leaving. Something had gone through my cooler while I was out hiking. The lid was open. The latch was snapped. 2 protein bars were missing, and one of my water bottles was gone. Not spilled. Gone. No drag marks.
No torn rapes.
Nothing. I looked around the camp, checking for tracks. I found a few prints about 30 feet from the tent, bare feet. Human. Long toes. White heel pads. But the spacing was weird. They were far apart, like whoever made them had a long stride. They led out toward the trees, then disappeared. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints. I didn't know what to think. It didn't look like any boots or shoes. Could have been a prank, but I hadn't seen another soul since I left Boise City. And this place wasn't exactly easy to stumble across. I told myself it was an old hiker, maybe a squatter, someone camping nearby and messing around. I packed everything into the truck except the tent and the bag. I kept the rifle with me all day, even when I walked to relieve myself. That night, I didn't make a fire. I ate a cold can of beans, stayed quiet, and listened. Around 10 p.m., I saw a light on the ridgeline, a soft white light, like someone holding a flashlight and trying to cover it with their hand. It would flicker, then disappear, then show again a few feet to the side. Not fast like someone walking, slow and uneven. I watched it for maybe 20 minutes. Then it went dark. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the tent, clutching the rifle, listening to the wind. The air was heavy, still hot, but the wind had stopped. Around 1 a.m., I heard movement outside again. But this time it wasn't walking. It was crawling. I could hear hands and knees pressing through the grass. Low to the ground. Soft. Deliberate. I held my breath. My heart was thudding so loud I thought it might give me away. The crawling stopped just outside the tent. I could feel it. Something was right there, just beyond the nylon wall. Then the zipper moved. Not fast. It just shifted an inch. Then another. Slow. Careful. I snapped. I yanked the rifle up, undid the safety, and shouted out. Not words, just noise. A growl. A warning. The zipper froze. Then silence. For a full minute, nothing moved. Then I heard fast footsteps running off toward the trees. I waited until sunrise before moving. When the sky was light, I unzipped the tent and stepped out, rifle ready. I checked around. More bare footprints, scattered in the dry grass.
No shoe prints.
No tire tracks. No signs of a camp nearby. I went up to the ridgeline where I saw the light the night before. It was empty, just dirt and dry weeds. Nothing up there. I didn't eat breakfast. I packed the tent fast, shoved everything into the truck bed, and peeled out of that basin like the devil himself was behind me. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station 4 hours east. I sat there in the lot for nearly an hour, just breathing. I didn't tell anyone about it for weeks. When I finally did, I said it was a trespasser, probably a hermit or a tweaker living out there, trying to scare me off. That's what I needed to believe. It was easier than explaining the footprints, or the crawling, or the light, or the zipper. I went back home, tried to forget it, but a few weeks later I started reading up on legends tied to that area. Stories from local tribes, skinwalkers, shapeshifters, beings that live in the wilderness and mimic people. I'm not saying I believe all of it. I don't. I think 90% of that stuff is stories passed down to explain things people didn't understand. But that last 10%? I don't know. All I know is I've camped plenty of times in different places, Arkansas, Colorado, even Arizona, and I've never felt that same feeling. That creeping, slow dread. That pressure in your chest that tells you something is wrong. Like the land itself is watching you. I haven't been back to the Panhandle since. I still have the tent, but it's packed away in my attic. Sometimes I think about pulling it down, driving out somewhere quiet, trying again, but then I remember the sound of crawling, the zipper, the prints, and I leave it where it is. Some places just don't want you there, and I'm okay with that now. My name is Chris Donnelly. I was 34 years old when this happened. It was the summer of 2011. I was living alone in a small apartment in Youngstown, Ohio. Back then, I worked night shifts at a printing warehouse and spent most of my free time indoors. The kind of life that slowly eats away at you if you let it. I was out of shape, smoked too much, and barely saw daylight. It got to the point where the walls of my place started closing in. I needed air. I needed to hear wind in the trees and feel something other than the glow of fluorescent lights on my face. One Friday morning, after another 12-hour shift, I packed up my old Ford Explorer and hit the road. I didn't have a real plan, just a desire to be alone in the woods, away from people and noise. I brought my tent, some basic camping gear, a cooler full of food and water, and my grandfather's old hunting knife. Not for hunting, just for general use. I also had an old map of Wayne National Forest tucked in the glove compartment, with a few remote campsites marked in red ink. I had used it a couple of times in my 20s and remembered one site in particular. About 10 miles off any paved road, way out near a logging trail that hadn't been maintained in years. I figured it'd be empty. Most people wanted easier access. I wanted the opposite. I drove south for a few hours, got off at a forgotten exit, and followed cracked country roads until they turned to gravel. Then dirt. Then nothing more than a rutted-out path half swallowed by tall weeds and creeping tree roots. My SUV handled it fine, though I could feel the undercarriage scrape once or twice. When I finally parked, I was probably a good hour's hike from the nearest structure. That was perfect for me. I reached the clearing around 3 p.m. It was smaller than I remembered, only about 40 feet across, surrounded by tall pines and thick underbrush. No cell signal, no power lines, no tire tracks. The last person here had probably come and gone years ago. I set up my tent, gathered some dry wood, and started a small fire before sunset. I didn't plan to stay long. 2 nights, maybe 3. Just long enough to reset my head before diving back into the factory noise and the dirty, recycled air of my life. The first night was uneventful. I made instant coffee, grilled some sausage over the fire, and sat on a flat rock with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The air was cooler than I expected. Once the sun dipped below the trees, the forest got quiet, eerily quiet. No bugs, no owls, just the occasional breeze rattling the high branches. I didn't think much of it. I was used to the silence. I even liked it. But then around 2 a.m., I heard something that made me sit up inside my tent. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. It wasn't loud, just a sharp, distant clink, like a tool dropped on a rock. I froze, held my breath. Nothing followed. I told myself it might have been a tree branch falling or some kind of animal stepping on something hard, but the rhythm of it was human, deliberate. I laid back down and listened for another hour before sleep finally dragged me under. In the morning, I circled the camp a few times, looking for signs. I didn't find footprints or gear or anything unnatural, just old sticks and deer tracks. I shook it off. The second day, I hiked deeper into the woods. I followed a creek for a while, tried catching fish, didn't get any. Spent a lot of time just staring into the water. Around mid-afternoon, I found a hollowed-out tree that looked like it had been gnawed open. There were bones inside, deer bones, maybe, picked clean. That didn't bother me. Nature's full of strange things. But what got me was the small pile of rocks beside it, stacked like a little tower, balanced perfectly, too clean to be random. It looked fresh, like someone had made it recently. I kicked it over without thinking and walked away. I got back to camp an hour before dark. The air had changed, heavier, colder. My firewood was scattered like something had rooted through it. Again, no tracks.
No scat. No claw marks.
Just a mess. I ate a cold dinner, barely chewed, and sat with my knife in hand long after the fire burned down. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I closed my eyes, but my ears were open. At 4:11 a.m., I heard it again. Clink. Then silence. Then, 5 minutes later, closer this time, asterisk clink. Clink. Asterisk. I crawled out of the tent, barefoot, holding my flashlight and knife. I scanned the trees but saw nothing, just that massive wall of black. I stayed out there for 20 minutes, waiting to hear it again. But it stopped. I got back inside and stayed in a sitting position until the sun finally broke through the trees. That morning, I was done. I packed up most of my gear, stuffed it into the SUV, and doused the fire pit with water. But before I left, something pulled at me, a kind of gnawing, anxious pull in my gut. I walked a slow circle around the edge of the clearing, just making sure everything looked right. That's when I saw the tree. About 50 yards into the brush, there was a large pine with something carved into it. For slashes, deep, uneven, fresh, maybe a day old. They weren't shaped into anything, but they were deliberate. Someone had taken a hatchet or a knife and dug into that bark recently. The sap was still oozing. I backed away and left. The drive out took longer. I was nervous, making mistakes, hitting more bumps than I should have. When I got back on the paved road, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I drove straight to a roadside diner, got coffee, and sat in the parking lot for almost an hour before heading home. That should have been the end of it. But 3 days later, back in my apartment, I noticed something strange. On the back windshield of my SUV, drawn in the dirt and pollen, was a shape. A crude, finger-drawn shape, for vertical lines, just like the ones carved into the tree. I cleaned it off and checked all the locks. Nothing was broken, nothing stolen, but someone had been close enough to touch my car without me knowing. I stopped camping after that. Weeks passed, then months. Life went on. I switched jobs, got a new car, even moved to a different part of town. But that feeling never really left. That sensation of being watched, of having missed something, some piece of the puzzle that would have made sense of it all. I didn't talk about it for years. Then, in 2018, I came across a forum while scrolling late at night. It was one of those survivalist boards where people share gear tips and strange experiences. One thread caught my eye, titled * Strange Sounds in Wayne National Forest. Anyone else? * The posts were scattered across years, but some of them mentioned the same metallic sound. * Clink. Clink. * Some described finding carved trees, odd stacks of rocks, or items moved around their camps while they slept. A few even mentioned the symbol, for vertical slashes drawn crudely, like tally marks. One post in particular stuck with me. A user said he'd been hiking near a disused logging trail back in 2009 and came across an old shack. He didn't give coordinates, but he described the same remote area I had camped in. Said the shack was full of rusted tools, some with dried blood on the handles. Hatchets, saws, and nails. Said he got a bad feeling and left. Another user replied saying the area had a dark history. Something about an old recluse in the 80s who lived deep in the woods and went missing after a string of break-ins and disappearances. No body ever found. Just his cabin, stripped and abandoned. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the most unsettling part? That forum thread, it was deleted a few weeks after I read it. Just gone. And when I went back to look for the user who posted about the shack, his account was wiped too. No posts, no name, nothing. I haven't gone back to those woods since. I won't. But every once in a while, when I'm driving through rural parts of Ohio or southern Pennsylvania, I catch myself scanning the tree lines, looking for movement, listening for that sound. Clink. I don't know who or what I almost ran into out there, but it wasn't an animal, and it wasn't a ghost. It was a person, a real one, and they're still out there, waiting for someone else to wander too far from the road. It was October of 2013, and I was 32 at the time. I lived in a small town near Bernkastel-Kues in Germany, not far from the edge of the Hunsrück forest. I'd been getting into hiking more seriously that year, and after a rough stretch at work, I took a long weekend off to clear my head. I wanted to get away from everything. Phones, computers, people. Just me, the forest, and the cold, clean air of the hills. I've been planning the trip for about a month. The weather report said it would be wet, especially at night, but I didn't care. I packed accordingly: heavy-duty tent, water-resistant hiking pants, layered thermals, even a pair of army surplus gaiters. I took enough food for 3 days, a decent first aid kit, a folding knife, flashlight, headlamp, waterproof map, compass, and a loaded power bank in case of emergency. I wasn't new to hiking. I've been out before. This wasn't even close to the wildest trip I'd done. Still, I wasn't fully prepared for how unnerving solitude in that kind of rain could become. I left my car at a trailhead near a gravel road that cuts off from the B50. The road isn't even marked on newer GPS maps, and I only knew about it because a coworker of mine used to hunt there. From the trailhead, I planned to hike about 6 kilometers into the woods and set up camp near a small ridge where the trees thinned out. The idea was to stay the night, then loop around a rocky creek bed the next morning, and hike back on the third day. The hike in was uneventful, though the clouds were already heavy when I set out that Friday afternoon. The deeper I went, the darker it got, even though it was only around 4 p.m. The air was thick with the smell of pine, wet bark, and soil. I heard birds here and there, mostly quiet types, woodpeckers and thrushes. No signs of other hikers.
No garbi.
Not even boot prints in the wet dirt. I liked that. By the time I reached the ridge and set up camp, it was already misting. I pitched the tent on a slightly elevated patch of ground under a thick canopy of firs. I cooked a quick meal: rice, beans, and a strip of smoked pork I'd brought. I ate sitting on a folding stool, watching the mist creep like a slow tide through the undergrowth. When it got dark, I climbed into the tent and zipped up, listening to the first real drops of rain as they started tapping gently on the fly. It wasn't bad that first night, just steady rain, nothing crazy. I slept fine and woke around 6. The morning was cold and gray, but not freezing. I brewed coffee over the camp stove and checked the ground outside the tent for any signs of animals. Nothing, just the usual paw prints from what looked like a fox, maybe a deer or two. I packed a day bag with some food and water, locked the rest inside the tent, and started hiking the loop I had planned. It was supposed to be a 12-kilometer route. The path would take me past a dried-up creek bed with some neat rock formations and eventually bring me back around to camp from the other side of the ridge. I followed the trail markers for a few kilometers, but they started to thin out. The deeper I went, the more overgrown the trail became. That's when I first noticed it. Just past a fallen log, there was an old overgrown clearing to the left of the trail. Something about the shape of the undergrowth looked unnatural, like it was hiding something rectangular. I stepped off the trail and pushed through the wet grass and weeds, boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. About 20 meters in, I saw it. A trailer. Not the kind you haul behind a car. This was larger, more like a rusted-out mobile home. It sat on a slight incline, half hidden by trees and moss. The paint was peeling off in large strips, and the windows, if you could call them that, were just small slits of glass, fogged up and dirted over the years. It had clearly been there a long time, maybe decades. No tire tracks, no paths leading to it. Just abandoned, like someone had towed it in and left it to rot. I should have left right then. I know that now, but curiosity pulled me in. The door was on the far side, facing away from the trail. I circled around slowly, keeping my distance. The whole thing was covered in patches of green and brown lichen. A sagging metal awning hung crooked above the entrance, and the door itself was padlocked shut with a thick rusted chain. A sticker was still visible near the handle, something in faded red text, probably a warning or a brand logo. The hinges were stained deep orange, and the lock looked fused with rust. No way that door had been opened in years. I told myself it was just an old hunting shelter or maybe some forest workers' trailer from the 80s, but it felt wrong. I don't mean paranormal or anything, just wrong, like it didn't belong there. I started to walk away, but then saw something that made me freeze. Behind the trailer, hidden near one of the wheel wells, was a patch of ground that looked like it had been dug up and filled back in, relatively recently. The soil was looser, darker than the rest. No grass had grown back over it. Maybe an animal had buried something, or someone had. I didn't touch it. I don't mess with things like that. I turned around and left, but the whole hike back I felt like I was being followed. The rain picked up around noon, and by the time I reached camp, my clothes were soaked and my boots were filled with water. I spent the next few hours drying my gear under the tent's vestibule and trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I told myself it was just isolation messing with my head. That night, it stormed. Heavy rain slammed the tent like handfuls of gravel. The wind howled through the trees, bending the firs and making the forest groan and creak. Couldn't sleep. Every few minutes I'd jolt awake, sure I'd heard something moving outside. Branches breaking, maybe. Footsteps, maybe not. Once, I thought I saw a light flicker behind the trees, but it was probably just lightning reflecting off wet leaves. Then around 3 a.m., I heard a metallic clank. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. A dull, hollow sound, metal on metal, like a chain being moved. I sat up fast and shut off my headlamp. The tent was silent except for the rain. I waited, listening hard, barely breathing. A few minutes passed. Nothing. Then again, asterisk clank. Asterisk this time, closer. I stayed awake until dawn. When light finally bled into the tent, gray and cold, I emerged slowly. Everything was soaked. The forest looked miserable, muddy, dripping, thick with fog. I checked around the tent. No tracks.
No disturbances.
But the feeling that I wasn't alone hadn't left. I packed up early. I was supposed to stay one more night, but I didn't want to. I took the most direct route back to the trailhead. As I passed the spot where I'd seen the trailer, I looked over. Couldn't help it. The padlock was gone. I froze, standing there in the rain, staring at the door. The chain was still there, but it had been broken, ripped or cut or something. It dangled loose, and the door hung slightly ajar. Not wide open, just a sliver. Enough to see that the inside was pitch black. No light, no movement. Just dark, wet, and silent. I didn't go near it. I didn't look inside. I just started walking faster than before. I kept my hand near my knife the whole way back. Took me 4 hours to reach the car, and I never looked back. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I found a creepy old trailer and heard chains in the rain? That someone might have been inside or had come back to it? I couldn't prove anything. I didn't even get a photo. But the weird part came a few weeks later. I was at the hardware store picking up some things for a bathroom project. There's a bulletin board near the front where people post ads, babysitting, used bikes, local events. I walked past it and something caught my eye. A photo. It was old and grainy, printed on plain white paper. It showed a trailer. Same shape, same kind, same faded red sticker on the door. The text above the photo said something like, asterisk, missing since 1997. Last seen near Hirschfeld Forest. Any information appreciated. Asterisk, my stomach dropped. I didn't take the flyer, but I remember the contact number and looked it up later. It was disconnected. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. I don't hike alone anymore, and I don't ignore my gut when it tells me to walk away. It was the summer of 2011 when I made one of the worst decisions of my life. I was 32 back then, living in a small town outside Colchester, in the east of England. I'd been going through a rough patch, nothing dramatic, just one of those stretches in life when everything feels dull, off track, kind of heavy for no real reason. My job at a local warehouse was the same grind every day, and the friends I used to hang around with had all sort of drifted into family life or moved away. I had no girlfriend at the time, no real hobbies either, unless long walks and staring at old buildings counted. But I liked solitude, I liked space, and that summer I craved something different. I'd always been weirdly interested in old cemeteries, not because of ghosts or spooky stuff, but more because of the history buried there. Names eroded by time, birth dates from 2 centuries ago, stone angels leaning under their own weight. I found them quiet, peaceful in a way that most people don't understand. So when I read about an abandoned graveyard just outside a place called Little Maplestead, I was curious. It was mentioned in a comment thread on some local hiking blog. A church that had burned down decades ago, the ground still untouched, the stones still standing, the place tucked away in a wooded patch a few miles off the beaten track. Someone had posted a blurry photo of a tilted iron gate and mossy stone steps. I decided to go, not just visit, camp, stay a night, alone, with a tent, sleeping bag, torch, and my rucksack full of the usual gear. I told myself it would just be quiet and interesting. No one would be around. It would be peaceful. Maybe I'd sketch a few of the older stones or write in my notebook. Maybe I'd just sit and listen to the trees and get a break from the world for a night. That's how I framed it to myself. I had no idea how wrong that idea was. I left around noon on a Saturday. It took me 2 buses and a 3-mile walk to get anywhere near Little Maplestead. Then another hour of walking across fields, following a rough GPS marker on my old phone. The last half-mile was through woods, and there wasn't any real path. Just bits of broken fence, rabbit trails, and mossy soil under dense beech trees. The sun was still high, the air warm but not hot, and everything smelled green and earthy. I remember feeling good when I finally saw the rusted iron gate through the trees. The graveyard was exactly like the blurry photo I'd seen. The gate hung crooked, and there was a short, uneven path made of broken stone that led to the center. The church was gone. All that remained was part of the stone foundation and some charred wood tucked under brambles. I could see maybe 30 or 40 gravestones scattered around, some broken, some half-sunk, most tilted in the soil like they were sinking. Everything was overgrown, but not wild. It didn't feel scary, just old and forgotten, and quiet. I picked a spot near the back corner where a small stone wall stood, the kind that used to mark property lines. There was a flat bit of ground just behind the wall, and from there I could still see most of the gravestones. I set up my small one-man tent, unrolled the mat and bag, and sat down with a bottle of water, just looking around. The first couple of hours were actually peaceful. Birds flitted through the trees. A fox trotted past the far side of the graveyard without giving me a glance. I explored a bit, took photos of old stones, tried to make out names and dates, brushed away some moss. Some graves were from the 1800s, a few from the early 1900s. There were two with fresh flowers, which surprised me, but they were fake plastic ones, probably put there years ago and never taken away. Around 6 or so, I made a small meal using a camp stove, just some noodles and tinned meat. I ate while sitting on the stone wall, staring into the trees. It was getting darker by then, and the air had cooled. I had a thick hoodie and a jacket, so I stayed warm, but I could feel the chill coming in. Still, nothing about it felt off. Yet, it was just after sunset when I started feeling uneasy. First, it was little things. A rustle in the trees that didn't sound like wind. A snapping twig that made me turn fast, only to see nothing. Then something I couldn't shake. The strange sense of being watched. You know how you just know when someone's looking at you, even if they're behind you? That heavy, invisible pressure? I felt it then, and I couldn't explain why. I told myself it was just being alone in a place like that. Your brain plays tricks. Maybe it was a deer or a badger nearby, but the feeling stayed. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every few minutes, I turned and scanned the woods behind the graveyard. At one point, I even called out. Not words, just a loud, annoyed sound, hoping it would scare off anything alive out there. But it didn't. By the time it was fully dark, I had the torch out, and I was staying close to the tent. I sat against the wall, facing the graves, eating a chocolate bar, and trying to stay calm. I didn't have a phone signal out there, which I'd known ahead of time. That didn't bother me until it started feeling like I should leave. But I didn't want to look like a coward to myself. I'd made this plan. I brought all my gear. I told myself I'd stay until morning, and I was stubborn enough to stick to it. I got into the tent around 10, zipped the door shut, kept the torch on low. I lay there listening to the wind in the trees, trying to ignore every creak and snap and thud outside. I probably dozed off after midnight. It was the sound that woke me, a very sharp, very clear metallic clink. It wasn't loud, but it was real. It sounded like metal on stone. Not a branch, not an animal. Came from just outside the tent, maybe 10 feet away. I sat up fast. My heart was pounding so hard it made my ears ring. I didn't breathe for a few seconds, listening. I heard nothing else. Then another sound, closer. Clink. I grabbed the torch and flicked it on. Through the thin fabric of the tent, I could see the glow stretch out into the graveyard. I couldn't see what had made the sound, but I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing moved. I wanted to open the tent and shine the light outside, but I was frozen. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was footsteps, human ones, slow, crunching the undergrowth, coming from the far side of the graves. I knew then that someone was out there. I turned off the torch, sat completely still. Every breath felt loud in the quiet. The footsteps stopped. I stayed like that for at least half an hour. My muscles started to ache from being tense. I had a knife in my bag, a small camping blade, and I pulled it out, holding it tight even though my hands were shaking. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't move. I didn't turn the torch back on. At some point near dawn, when the sky started going gray-blue, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The graveyard looked normal. No one was there. Nothing seemed out of place. I stepped out slowly, legs numb and stiff, and scanned the entire area. I walked past the stones. I checked behind trees and bushes. No sign of anyone. No footprints I could make out. But then, near one of the older graves in the far corner, I saw something that stopped me cold. A shovel. A long-handled shovel. Clean, not rusted. Freshly left. It wasn't mine. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I backed away and packed up my tent so fast I left the last food pouch behind. I stuffed everything into the rucksack, didn't bother with proper folding or zipping, and I left that place at full speed. I didn't stop walking until I was on the road near the village again. I found a bench outside a small bus stop and sat there in silence for over an hour before the first bus came. That was 14 years ago now. I never went back. I still don't know who was out there, or what they were doing with a shovel in the graveyard at 2 in the morning. I think about it sometimes when I can't sleep. There were no supernatural things.
No ghost lights. No strange dreams.
Just a man. A real, breathing man, walking through graves at night with a tool meant for digging. That's worse than any ghost, in my opinion. I told a friend about it a year later, and he looked into it. Said there'd been reports long ago about someone disturbing graves around that area. Nothing ever confirmed.
No arrests.
No names. Just rumors. And maybe I caught one night of it. Or maybe it was something else. All I know is this: what I felt that night wasn't fear of the dark or fear of being alone. It was fear of being watched by someone who didn't want me there. Someone who waited for dark and silence and wasn't scared to walk between graves with a shovel in hand. That's the kind of fear that stays with you. And that's why I'll never camp anywhere near a graveyard again. It was the summer of 2017 when I decided to take a solo camping trip across southern Wales. I was 34 at the time, not exactly inexperienced when it came to being outdoors, but also not some survival expert. I just liked the quiet of the woods, the time away from people, and the feeling of waking up to birds and cold air instead of an alarm clock and city noise. That particular trip wasn't really planned out, which is probably where things started to go wrong. I'd taken a week off work and just packed up my old Honda with a tent, sleeping bag, food, stove, the usual stuff. I figured I'd drive until I found a spot that looked good, pitch the tent, and move around every night or two. I had an old paper road atlas, no GPS, and just followed small roads and hunches. By the third night, I'd camped in a field behind an abandoned barn and then in a patch of thick woods near a river. Both were uneventful, peaceful even. That morning, I drove for hours down country lanes that got narrower and rougher the farther I went. I had no destination, just turning when something caught my eye. Around 5 p.m., I passed an old rusted sign for a disused quarry. The sign was half covered by brush, the lettering faded, but I could still make out Coombe BLW Quarry, closed 1998. There was a dirt path branching off from the main road that led into the trees beside it. The ground looked dry, not too rutted, and it was getting late. I figured maybe the quarry area would be a decent spot for the night, probably flat, and no one would bother me there. I turned down the path, driving slowly over rocks and roots, my car bouncing gently. It opened up after a few minutes into a wide clearing with a steep wall of exposed rock about 100 meters away. The quarry had filled in partly with rain over the years, forming a deep pool of still, dark water that didn't look very inviting. There was no sign of people, no trash, no tire marks, nothing. Just silence and the wind moving through the grass. Felt isolated, but not in a creepy way. More like forgotten. Peaceful. I parked the car on the flattest ground I could find and started setting up the tent maybe 20 meters from the water. The air had that warm, dry feeling you only get in late summer, with long shadows and a golden tint to everything. I cooked some pasta on my little camp stove and ate while watching the water. There were no birds around, no bugs flying over the pool. The stillness felt heavier the longer I sat there, like the quarry swallowed sound somehow. After dinner, I walked around the edge of the quarry a bit. The rock walls were steep, crumbling in places, streaked with old mineral deposits. On one side, I found an old piece of machinery, maybe a winch or conveyor of some kind, completely rusted and choked with vines. Looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. That night, I fell asleep fast. It was quiet, no roads, no planes, not even an owl. the kind of silence that's so thick it starts to hum in your ears. I woke up sometime deep into the night, maybe 2 or 3 a.m. It wasn't a noise that woke me, more like a feeling, that shift in your body when you're dreaming and suddenly snap out of it, alert for no reason. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened, still dead quiet, but the air felt colder, heavy. I unzipped the tent slowly and poked my head out. The quarry was still there, still dark, but something was off. The sky had that faint gray tint it gets just before dawn, enough to see shapes, outlines. Across the water, directly on the other side of the quarry pool, I saw movement. It wasn't fast, just a slow, lurching step out from behind a rock pile. A man. He was too far for me to see his face, but I could make out his shape clearly. Tall, maybe 6 foot or more. Thin. The way he moved was strange. Stiff, almost limping. He stood there, looking at the water or maybe at me, though I couldn't tell. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed not to move, not to make a sound. I just crouched there, watching him. He didn't move closer, didn't call out, just turned his body slowly, looked toward the tree line for a while, then stepped back behind the rocks and disappeared again. I stayed awake for hours after that. I didn't get out of the tent. I just sat there with my hand on the camping knife I kept by my sleeping bag, staring at the faint shapes outside the mesh door. When the sun finally rose, I got out and scanned the quarry again. There was no sign of him. I walked around the edge where I'd seen him standing, but the ground was all loose rock and dry grass. No footprints, no gear, no campsites. I tried to shake it off. Told myself maybe it was a hiker, maybe a local guy exploring, even though the place looked untouched. Still, I packed up fast. I planned to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I followed a narrow path that led up a slope on the far side of the quarry, thinking it might lead to a logging trail or road. Instead, I found something else. About a 5-minute walk through the trees, I found an old shack. Not much more than rotting wood boards and a rusted tin roof, half collapsed in on itself. Inside were the remains of what looked like a bed frame, some old tools, a broken lantern, and a pile of trash. Not recent, but not ancient either. Food cans, crumpled plastic wrappers, a half-burned pair of boots. Someone had been using it. Maybe not recently, but certainly not 20 years ago when the quarry closed. That chilled me more than the man. Whoever he was, he might have been living out here. Hiding. Maybe mentally unstable. Maybe dangerous. And I had pitched my tent in his backyard. I left immediately. Drove without stopping until I hit a petrol station hours away. I didn't even care about the fuel. I just wanted to be around people again. I never reported it. I didn't even tell anyone, not really. What could I say? I saw a guy standing still by a quarry? People wouldn't get it. But I couldn't get it out of my head. A few months later, I got curious again, just enough to do a search online for that quarry. Not much came up. A few local articles about when it shut down, a minor injury case, nothing major. But then I found an old forum thread, buried deep, maybe 8 or 10 years old. It was just a few posts long, some locals talking about how kids used to dare each other to sneak into the quarry at night. One post stood out. A guy wrote, asterisk, "I'd never camped there. Everyone knows someone's still living out by the North Ridge shack. He doesn't like visitors." Asterisk, that was it.
No replies. No elaboration.
I never went back. Never even drove near that region again. But sometimes I think about that man, about how still he was, about how he didn't come closer, didn't shout, didn't do anything, just watched, or maybe waited. Whatever his story was, I'm just glad I left when I did. Another night out there, and maybe the ending would have been different. And now, when I camp, I plan it better. I research the area. I make sure I'm not on forgotten land. Because once you've looked across a silent pool of water in the dead of night and seen someone who isn't supposed to be there, you don't forget it. You don't take chances anymore. Ever. It was the summer of 2013, and I was 32. I had been working a desk job in Manchester for almost a decade, buried in screens and paperwork, and I needed a break from the noise, the people, the screens, everything. I had this old idea in my head, something I never really acted on, to disappear into the woods for a few days. No phones, no emails, no lights except fire and stars. Just trees and silence. So I took a week off, packed up my old hatchback, and drove up north into the Scottish Highlands. I didn't tell many people where I was going. Just a quick note to my sister. Told her I'd be camping around Loch Etive. I picked that spot because it wasn't too famous, not crawling with tourists, but not too far from some beaten tracks if I needed help. I brought a decent tent, a small axe, 2 big canisters of water, dehydrated food, matches, a torch with spare batteries, and a few basic tools. I also had a small hunting knife, not that I expected to use it. I liked the idea of being away from it all, being out there with no reception, no noise. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to be found. The weather was decent when I arrived, gray clouds but dry. I parked my car on a gravel pull-off near a forestry track and hiked about 2 hours into the woods until I found a flat bit of ground tucked away beside a stream. I was surrounded by old pine trees. The place was silent, with only the sound of running water and the occasional bird call. I set up camp, got a small fire going, ate one of those terrible tasting meals out of a foil pouch, and settled in for the night. The first night was peaceful, cold, but peaceful. I woke up early, made some tea over the fire, and spent the day hiking, taking photos and scribbling notes in a little journal I brought with me. I came back before dark, built another fire, and just sat there, staring into it. That was what I wanted, the silence, the space to think, or maybe to not think at all. But the second night, things shifted. It wasn't anything loud, just a feeling. I woke up around 2 a.m., the tent zipped tight. I wasn't sure why I woke up. Maybe a dream, maybe a noise, but I lay there listening. I couldn't hear anything at first, just the stream again, faint and steady. But then I noticed it had stopped. Not the stream, but everything else.
No birds.
No wind. Even the distant owl that had hooted the night before was gone. Just this heavy, weighty silence. I told myself it was nothing, just nature being nature, but I didn't sleep well after that. The next morning, I was groggy. I went down to the stream to wash my face and noticed something off with the mossy ground near the water. It had been disturbed, like someone had slipped or scuffed through it in the night. Could have been an animal, I told myself, but the shape of the disturbance didn't sit right with me. It was narrow at the top and longer at the bottom, like a boot print, but not quite clear enough to confirm. I shrugged it off, tried to, at least, spent the day climbing a nearby ridge and took some photos. The view was incredible, but I couldn't shake the unease. That feeling from the night before hadn't left. And when I got back to camp, I noticed something I was sure wasn't like that before. A stick, leaning against the tent. It wasn't there when I left. I was certain. It wasn't just a stick fallen from a tree. It had been placed, upright, pressed gently against the fabric of the tent. My first instinct was to look around. I didn't see anything. No movement in the trees.
No sounds.
Just the same eerie quiet from the night before. I picked the stick up and tossed it into the woods. That night, I didn't light a fire. I wanted to keep a low profile. I lay in the tent with the knife under my sleeping bag, wide awake, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a soft crunch of twigs. Then nothing. Then another. Came from the direction of the stream. I held my breath. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare make a sound. Then silence. Then something brushed the side of the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just lay there in the pitch black, heart hammering in my chest, barely breathing. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. but nothing else happened.
No voices.
No light, just that one moment, something brushing against the tent wall. In the morning, I got out and checked everything. No signs of anything unusual.
No prints.
No broken branches. Nothing, except the stick. The same one I had tossed into the woods. It was back, leaning in the exact same spot against the tent. I packed up everything. I wanted to leave, but when I reached the path I had come in on, it looked different. I knew I had gone straight in from the gravel lot, following a rough trail beside the stream. But now the trail looked wrong, curved left when it should have gone straight. Trees I didn't remember were now in the way. I tried to backtrack, but nothing looked familiar. I started to panic, but I told myself to stay calm. I had a map, a compass, and my phone even if there was no signal. I took a bearing and started walking in what should have been the direction of the road. But I didn't find the road. After hours of walking, I was deeper in the woods. I tried to loop back, thinking maybe I had misjudged. I walked until my legs ached, but I kept ending up in the same spots. A boulder shaped like a skull. A dead tree split down the middle. A mossy stump. I started marking them with bits of fabric from a bandana I tore up, and they kept showing up again. No matter which way I walked, I gave up and made camp again, desperate, angry, and tired. I built no fire. I barely ate. I slept with the knife in my hand. That night, the noises came back. More movement, more soft footsteps. Not running, just slow, careful. I kept my eyes open the whole time, and I swear, I saw something move in the dark, a shape, human, but not close, just at the edge of the tree line, watching. When dawn came, it was gone. I didn't wait. I packed up and walked again, this time using the sun as my guide. I ignored trails. I cut through brush. I climbed through thorns and over logs. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted out. Around mid-afternoon, I found a dry stone wall. That was the first man-made thing I had seen in days. I followed it and finally stumbled into a sheep pasture, and from there down to a road. I flagged down a farm truck. The man inside stared at me like I was a ghost, mud-streaked, scratched, and half-starved. He gave me water, told me I was miles off from Loch Ediv, nearly 30 miles northeast. Somehow I had gone completely off course. I thanked him and got dropped off in a village. I found a small pub, sat down, and didn't move for hours. I didn't say anything to anyone. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Not really, just that I had gotten lost. When I got back to my flat, I took everything from the trip, gear, maps, the knife, and shoved it into a box. I haven't opened it since. I've been camping again, but never alone. Never without signal, and never for more than a night. I don't know who or what was out there, but someone knew I was there. Someone watched me, followed me, played with me. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was someone who knew those woods better than I ever could, and they didn't want me there. It was summer 2017. I had just turned 35 a few months earlier. I'd gone through a rough patch that year. Nothing dramatic, just one of those times in life where everything piles up. Work was a mess. My relationship had fallen apart, and I was just tired. Tired in that deep kind of way that sleep doesn't fix. I needed to get away from people for a bit. I wasn't an outdoorsman or anything like that. I'd been camping a few times when I was younger, mostly with friends, but I'd never done a solo trip. I figured that if I went somewhere close enough to civilization, I could ease myself into it. I picked a forested area in North Yorkshire, not far from a small town called Helmsley. I'd found a quiet spot on an old hiking forum. Someone mentioned a clearing a bit off the path where you could pitch a tent and not be bothered. No campgrounds, no other hikers, no noise. Just trees and quiet. I left on a Thursday morning in late July. The drive was long but peaceful. The weather was warm, and the skies were mostly clear, a few clouds moving lazily across the blue. I parked my car at a lay-by along an old B road and walked into the woods with my gear. I had my rucksack, a decent tent, a sleeping bag, a small stove, some food, and a couple of books. I'd even brought a little folding chair, so I wouldn't have to sit on damp ground. The forest was beautiful. Tall trees, mostly birch and pine, with thick ferns covering the ground. The air smelled of sap and moss, earthy and clean. I followed the GPS on my phone for about 20 minutes, veering off the trail once I was close. The clearing wasn't big, just a flat patch of dirt with some logs scattered around, probably left behind by other campers. No signs of recent use, though, no footprints, no ash, no litter, just the way I wanted it. I pitched my tent at the edge of the clearing where the trees started again. From that angle, I could see the clearing and a bit of the path through the trees. Felt tucked away, private, safe even. The first day passed quietly. I made a cup of tea on my little stove, read for a while, walked around the forest a bit. I didn't go too far, just explored a few hundred meters in each direction so I wouldn't get turned around. I found a small stream running westward and followed it for a bit, marking my path with broken twigs and small stones. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, I had settled in. The temperature dropped a bit, but I had layers. The sounds of the woods were soft, birds calling out, the occasional rustle of something small in the brush. I cooked a bit of pasta, ate in silence, and climbed into my sleeping bag as the last light faded. That night, I slept deeply. The second day started the same way. I woke with the sun, made some coffee, stretched my legs. I sat in my chair for a long while, just watching the trees sway. It was peaceful. Around noon, I went further out, past the stream, deeper into the woods. I didn't have cell service, but I marked my way carefully. I still wasn't too far from my tent, maybe a 15-minute walk. That afternoon, something changed. I noticed it while I was boiling water. The forest had gone quiet.
No birds, no rustling.
Just whined through the trees. It wasn't sudden. It faded slowly, like someone had turned a dial. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe it was just the heat or the time of day. Animals get quiet sometimes. Still, it made me pause. Then I noticed something else. At the edge of the trees, maybe 30 feet away, I thought I saw someone. Just for a second. A figure. It was brief, like when you catch movement in your peripheral vision. I turned fully, and there was nothing. Just the trees and ferns. I stared for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light. Shadows moving, branches swaying. But I kept looking. That night, I didn't sleep as well. I lay in the tent, eyes closed, listening. The forest was mostly quiet, but every now and then, I thought I heard something. Soft footsteps on leaves, the snap of a twig. I told myself it was animals. Deer, maybe a fox. But I kept my hand near my torch and didn't fully fall asleep until after midnight. The next morning, I was tired. I drank my coffee and tried to shake the feeling off. I walked around to see if I could find tracks. Maybe convince myself it had been a deer or badger. I found nothing.
No prints, no bent branches, no droppings.
The woods looked exactly the same. I tried to enjoy the day like I had before, but I couldn't settle. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every sound made me freeze. Around 4 p.m., I heard something that made my stomach twist. A whistle, one short, sharp note, came from the trees behind my tent. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood still, trying to process it. It wasn't a bird. It was too deliberate, too human. I slowly walked in the direction it came from, but I didn't go far. I didn't want to lose sight of my tent. I looked between the trees, heart pounding. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I packed my bag that evening just in case. I left the tent up but folded my chair and put everything back in my pack except my sleeping bag. I kept the torch on me. I didn't cook. I didn't want the smell of food out in the air. That night was worse than the one before. I heard the whistle again, twice, and then footsteps, soft but close. They moved around the tent. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, frozen. The steps stopped for a long time, then I heard them again, moving away. I wanted to leave right then, but it was pitch black. The trail was hard enough to follow in daylight. I didn't want to get lost in the dark. I waited until first light. At 5 a.m., I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The forest was still. No wind, no animals. I scanned the clearing. That's when I saw it. On the tree nearest the tent, there was a mark. A deep slash, like something had carved into the bark with a knife. Fresh. The wood underneath was pale and raw. I turned and walked fast. I didn't run, but I wanted to. I kept looking behind me, half expecting to see someone following. When I reached the car, I threw my gear in the boot without packing it properly and drove off, hands shaking. I didn't go back. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That I saw a shadow and heard footsteps? But I never forgot the feeling that someone was out there, watching, waiting. 2 weeks later, I read a local news article. A man in his 40s had gone missing while camping not far from Helmsley. No foul play suspected, but they never found him. He'd left his car on the side of the road and vanished into the woods. I didn't sleep that night. That was 8 years ago. I haven't gone camping since. I still love the woods, but I keep my distance now. Every so often, I check the news from that area. No updates. Just a missing man and an old scar on a tree in North Yorkshire. Whatever was out there wasn't a ghost. It was just a man. But that's what makes it worse, because men are real, and they don't disappear when the sun rises. I was 32 the summer I decided to go camping by myself near Red Ash Ridge. It's a quiet part of eastern Utah, far enough from Moab to feel like real wilderness, but not too far from paved roads. I'd gone camping all my life, usually with friends or my older brother, but that summer I needed a break from people. I had just left a draining relationship and I was sick of the city. The noise, the concrete, the pressure of acting like everything was fine. I just wanted to be somewhere where there was no one around. It was mid-June 2016. I took a week off work and packed up my gear. My old green two-person tent, a couple of heavy-duty coolers with food, a folding chair, a hunting knife, a first aid kit, and a used .22 rifle I'd bought the previous winter. I wasn't a hunter or anything, but I liked having it for peace of mind when I was out in the woods alone. I wasn't expecting trouble. If anything, I figured the worst that would happen was a raccoon might try to get into my food. I drove 5.5 hours from Salt Lake City, leaving early on a Tuesday morning. By the time I hit the dirt roads that branched off near the old logging trail, it was just past noon. The sun was brutal out there. No clouds, dry wind, everything tinted with that reddish dust you only get in desert country. The trail leading into the forest wasn't well marked. I had to back up twice to find the turnoff that led up into the pines near the ridge. There were no other cars, no tire tracks. That's what I liked. I found a spot about 1.5 miles up a rough trail, a clearing surrounded by tall, sunburnt pines with a little rise overlooking the drop-off toward the valley. From there, I could see the rust-colored cliffs in the distance and nothing but trees all around. No buildings, no people, no buzzing phones. Just dry wind and that constant shimmer of heat on the rocks. I set up my tent near the treeline with the fire pit just a few feet from the flap. I collected wood, stashed the coolers under a tarp to keep the sun off, and spent the rest of the afternoon getting used to the quiet. You don't realize how much constant noise is in your life until it's gone.
No sirens, no engines, no voices.
Just the groaning trees and the occasional chirp of birds or bugs. That first night, I stayed up by the fire until the stars came out, watching the flames and listening to the wind push through the trees like water. I slept fine that night, but not the second. Something woke me up just past 2 a.m. It wasn't loud, more like a presence, like someone was standing just outside the tent. I didn't hear footsteps, but the air had changed. The way you know someone's in a room with you even if you can't see them. I sat up, unzipped the flap, and shined my flashlight out toward the fire pit. Nothing, just the leftover logs and the dying glow of the embers. I stood there for a while, trying to listen, but all I heard was the wind. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. I kept thinking I'd hear footsteps or twigs breaking. I told myself it was probably a deer. There were elk and coyotes in the area, too. I'd seen tracks on the trail. Maybe that was it. But it didn't feel like an animal. It felt like a person. The next day, I went further down the ridge. I took my rifle and hiked along one of the logging trails just to see how far it went. The dirt was dry and cracked, and I didn't see any boot prints or tire marks. No sign anyone had used the trail in a long time. Around noon, I came across a dead rabbit just lying off the path. It hadn't been eaten, just dead. No blood, no bite marks, no obvious wounds. Its neck looked stiff, like it had been broken clean. I didn't touch it, just moved on and told myself it could have been a hawk or something. Maybe it dropped it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I heard something breathing outside the tent. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Slow, measured breaths, like someone trying not to make noise but failing. I sat there, holding my rifle across my lap, not daring to move. I didn't unzip the flap this time. I didn't want to know. The breathing lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then nothing. I stayed up till sunrise, then got out to check the area.
No footprints.
Nothing disturbed. Not even the coals in the fire pit were moved. I told myself I was overreacting. I hadn't slept much. Maybe I was imagining things. I've been out there alone for 3 nights now. The mind starts doing weird stuff when you're by yourself too long. That's what I told myself. But I knew better. I've spent weeks in the woods. I know the difference between being alone and being watched. By the 4th day, something had changed. The woods didn't feel still anymore. They felt empty. The birds weren't making any noise. There were no squirrels. Even the insects seemed quiet. The air was heavier, like it was waiting for something. That evening, I went out to the rise where I had a better view of the valley. I brought my scope, hoping to maybe see a herd of elk in the distance or just distract myself. I spotted something around dusk. It was a figure way down in the valley near the treeline. It looked human, but not quite. Too thin. Its arms were too long, and it moved with a weird kind of motion, jerky but smooth at the same time, like it wasn't used to walking on 2 legs. It crossed the clearing and disappeared into the trees without looking up. I packed up camp right then. I didn't even make dinner. I shoved everything I could into my duffel, kicked dirt over the fire pit, and left the rest. I didn't care about the coolers or the chair. I just wanted out. The sun was going down, and I figured if I made good time, I could at least reach the car before it got pitch dark. I didn't. About half a mile down the trail, I started to smell something. It was sharp and sour, like rotting meat, the kind that sticks to the inside of your nose. I kept going, moving faster, and then I heard it. Not footsteps, something worse. It was mimicking me. Every time I stepped, I heard the same sound just a second after, like it was following me, copying my pace. I stopped. It stopped. I turned and scanned the trees with my flashlight. Nothing, just shapes and shadows. I turned back around and kept going, faster this time. Then I heard it breathing again, closer this time, not like a bear or a deer, Not fast, not heavy, just slow, deliberate breaths, inches behind me but never quite close enough to see. I broke into a run. I nearly slipped on the trail twice, almost fell into a washout, but I didn't care. My rifle was banging against my side, my legs were shaking, and all I could think was, asterisk, don't stop, don't stop. Asterisk, the car was another 20 minutes away, but I saw the glint of the metal roof through the trees. That kept me moving. My flashlight beam was weak now, cheap batteries, but I didn't stop to change them. I reached the car, slammed the rifle into the back seat, and jumped in. I locked the doors, turned the key, and nothing. The engine clicked but didn't turn over. I sat there, staring at the dash, heart hammering so hard I could barely see. I tried again. Click. Nothing. Then I saw it in the rear view, just for a second. A face too pale, with eyes too far apart, pressed against the back window. But when I turned around, there was nothing there.
No footprints.
No face, just the dark trees and the sound of my own breathing. I tried the key again and the car started. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I drove 20 miles down that dirt road with the high beams on and the windows rolled up, even though it was 90 degrees. I didn't even stop to rest until I hit the gas station back near the highway. When I got out, I checked the back of the car. There were scratches along the trunk. Long, thin marks like fingers. I didn't report it. Who would I even tell? A ranger? A sheriff? What would I say? Something followed me through the woods, and it might not have been human. I've never been back to Red Ash Ridge. Never will. A few months later, I read something online, just a short forum post about skinwalkers in the Utah backcountry. Most of it was garbage. People trying to scare each other. But one sentence stuck with me. If it knows you're scared, it will follow you farther. I think that's what happened. I think it followed me because I let it know I was afraid. Now, I still go camping, but I stay in parks or on marked land. I don't go deep anymore. I don't go alone. And I never, ever go back to a place where the woods are too quiet.